All right, we're past the halfway point now. We're into week 6. So today we're going to talk about stress and how that impacts our health and our weight, and more so how stress then impacts the hormones in our body that more so impact our weight and our health and chance for illness and stuff. So if you have questions throughout, come on to mute and ask, or you can put stuff in the chat. I don't really see it on my screen shared, but I'll try to pay better attention. So stress reset. This week's challenge was for you guys to kind of be more intentional with eating and focusing on what you're eating. And that has to do a little bit about getting in tune with your hormones. And we'll talk about that a little bit, and what makes you hungry and what makes you satisfied, and being able to recognize those sensations in the body and how hormones can affect that too. And so by being present when you're eating or enjoying food is super helpful when it comes to health and weight management. But we'll jump into some more hormone stuff. So first of all, we're going to talk about stress. Stress is pretty unavoidable in life, but there are good stresses, there are bad stresses, and a lot of it comes down to how we have an outlook on those stressors and how we choose to manage and cope with those stresses in our life. Overall, stress is just the process by which the body perceives and responds to events, and usually those we feel are threatening or challenging. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be bad, but it can be difficult or something we're anxious or unsure about. There are acute stresses. This is when our fight or flight response can kick in. So if you're in like a noisy area or crowded places, even hunger can cause sort of these fight or flight responses and the hormones along with that. And then there are eustresses, which are what we can typically consider the good stresses. And so that's going to be things like the stress of planning a wedding or a graduation party, tests or before your graduation or finals, big papers that are due, maybe a speech you have to give. Exercise can also be a stress. You put stress on your heart, you put stress on your muscles and your bones, but that's good stress when done in the right quantities, because that's how the body responds to make things stronger and build more muscle and stronger bones. And then the stress of like an athletic competition or some sort of arts performance or something where your nerves and your anxiety peak, but usually that subsides. And there's usually a success at the ends of these good stress events, positive outcomes. But then, of course, there are chronic stressors, and most of us have these in our lives. These are frequent situations that we often have to suppress because we don't have time to deal with them, and they're so frequent they just keep building, and we're kind of in that elevated state of stress if we don't have healthy coping mechanisms. So that can be a difficult work environment or situations or difficult colleagues, relationship problems, even loneliness can be a stressor. If there's worries financially, health worries, prolonged illnesses can have stress on the body. If you read the news, you might get super stressed chronically these days. Social media has been shown to create a lot of anxiety and stress in individuals, and all of us are addicted to being on social media. So that definitely can impact our stress and maybe not even recognize it. And then certainly, huge moments like the death of a loved one, maybe some sort of natural disaster, a financial hardship that came that was unexpected, those kinds of things. A lot of times those are prolonged stresses, and a lot of times we're not able to sufficiently deal with them or maybe even address them because it's outside of our capacity fully to remove that stress. So these things just build up in the body. And there's so many health implications we know that are associated with stress. We're depleted immunity. We'll talk a little bit about this today. But stress definitely wears down on the hormones that support strong immune systems. So you're more likely to get sick more often because of that stress. We'll talk a lot about insulin and how stress increases the amount of insulin in our body. And if you remember from previous sessions when we were talking about insulin, insulin is sort of that hormone that triggers fat storage. So of course, stress can lead to weight gain in some individuals. It increases adrenaline, which can be a good thing, but that also stimulates the release of cortisol, which is also a fat storing and fat mechanism hormone in the body. And we'll talk a lot about cortisol today. Can increase your heart rate and your blood pressure, chances of blood clots. So that whole cardiovascular health risk is elevated with stress, heart attacks, strokes, that kind of stuff. It does impact memory, increases belly fat storage. Again, this is circling back to the insulin release that's in uptick. Inflammation has been shown to be linked to stressors. So you might see an increase in digestive issues, irritable bowel syndromes, colitis can pop up. Certain allergies might exacerbate, asthma, ulcers. We already talked about cardiovascular disease, but inflammation can rear its head many different ways in the body. Fertility issues have been shown to be pretty well linked to stressors in the body and subsequently because of the shift in hormones. Fatigue, insomnia, depression, migraines, irritability. We'll talk about a little bit about those as we move forward. So let's jump into the first major hormones that can influence our health and maybe our weight management. Serotonin, this is a good hormone in the body. These are released when we're having fun. These are our happy hormones. So they are released at night when we're sleeping, when we're at rest, but also they're triggered when we have fun. They're triggered by us being in sunlight. They're triggered when we exercise. They're released when we're listening to music, singing music, playing music. Laughing releases serotonin. You can also get an uptick when you're taking certain B vitamins. And so serotonin is a great hormone to have in the body and circulating, right? And some people are just naturally happier people, and it's probably because they have mastered how to release their serotonin so often. But these are some other ways to make sure you're doing. So go exercise in the sun and make sure it's something fun and listen to music while you're doing it, and you'll have a lot of serotonin floating around in you. On the flip side, cortisol is released, and we'll talk about cortisol here in a minute. When you are eating a lot of excess sugar, because when you have a lot of sugar in your bloodstream, your insulin rises to take care of that sugar, and we know that insulin then impacts cortisol release. So more sugar means more cortisol. Excessive exercise, that comes to the point where there's like too much stress on the body. If you're someone who's an excessive exerciser, there needs to be that rest. And we talked about that in some of those exercise sessions. You don't want to wear down your body by continually putting too much stress or excessive exercise on the muscles and the bones and the body. It needs that recovery time, just like it needs sleep. This is one reason why you'll never see me training for a marathon. Because when I went to school, I remember the professors hounding me. And they're like, marathons are one of the worst things you can do for your body as a stressor. So I've used that as my excuse all these years not to run super long distances. Poor sleep, we've talked about this, and we'll have a whole session on this next time. But limited sleep, inadequate sleep increases cortisol, and just negativity in general, opposite of that happy-go-lucky person. When you continually have that negative Nelly personality, that also is correlated with elevated cortisol levels in the body. So serotonin acts to slow down dopamine, which dopamine is also a good feel-good receptor. And it's usually released in those fight or flight situations sometimes. Serotonin can slow down that, which hampers long-term to hamper cortisol production. But if you're not releasing serotonin, then that cortisol production continues to ramp up, and you just always have elevated cortisol levels in the body. So let's see what time it is. Maybe there's a good video. I don't know if I'll have time to share it, but I'll put it in the chat if you want to watch it. It's 4 minutes, but it talks about how serotonin and cortisol are related. And again, these are the things you want to focus on, and cortisol are the things you want to avoid to make sure you can keep those hormones in good check. And so why is cortisol so bad? It's not bad in doses, but when it's chronically elevated, that's when it starts to impact our health and our weight. Cortisol by itself is a natural response to that fight or flight situation, right? It promotes energy. It gives us that burst of adrenaline and speed to get out of there if the lion's chasing us. So in short doses, it's a great thing. But when we have chronic stresses in our life and that cortisol is continuing to pump out because the body thinks it needs to fight but doesn't have time, that's the bad thing. So insulin is one hormone that we've been talking about. It's produced in the pancreas, and like we said, it's how your body uses sugar or controls how your body uses sugar. It either helps store it as glucose in the cells for energy, right? So if you're exercising or whatever, you need that energy. Glucose is the body's best, fastest choice, so it'll want to use that. If you're not exercising or you don't need that extra energy, then insulin can help the body store that glucose as fat. It opens, basically, if you think about cells, it sort of unlocks the door to the cells so that the sugar can come out of the bloodstream into the cells. So insulin's sort of like the key. When cells have all the energy they need, obviously insulin signals the cortisol hormone to assist the fat cells in uptaking that extra glucose and storing it as triglycerides. I think we just talked about this last week, how all that excess calorie we're eating, the fastest way the body can store that is as a triglyceride. So again, insulin's that key, opening up the cell door. If it needs to be energy, it's going into the muscles for sugar as glucagon and glucose. But if it's full, or, we're someone who's not exercising very often and not using our energy, then it's going to go through the fat storage door and turn into a triglyceride by triggering cortisol. And if we have too much insulin in our bloodstream at all the time, that can start to make our insulin less sensitive to helping manage our glucose, our blood sugars, and that leads to diabetes and also weight gain. Most of the time, our insulin levels stay elevated because we have too much blood sugar in our stream all the time. Like, we're never taking a break from eating, or we always have carbs that we're ingesting throughout our day. And we're not using that as energy, so we're not active. So if you're someone like me who has a desk job and you don't get many steps in your workday and you're still eating all of your meals and your snacks and stuff, like, the body is continually barraged with calories and stuff and not using it for energy. So it's going to stimulate that cortisol to help me turn it into fat for storage. So again, it's just a vicious two-way cycle. Like, if you're under stress, your body releases cortisol in the response to be ready to fight, right? It's telling the body, you need energy, it's going to have to fight. And then so all that energy goes into the bloodstream, but then the insulin's like, well, if we don't need it for energy, because we were just kidding, we're not really going to exercise or fight this stressor, we're going to turn it back into fat, and vice versa. So it's just a vicious cycle. Ghrelin is another important hormone. This is our hunger hormone. It stimulates our appetite. So if you're really good at listening to this is gonna make your belly growl when you're truly, truly hungry. And also can promote fat storage. It's easy for this hormone to kind of disappear into the background, particularly if we're an emotional eater. So we can kind of override this appetite sensation and not pay attention to it if we're someone that's an emotional eater. Studies have shown that people who have gastric bypass surgery actually end up with lower ghrelin hormone levels after surgery. I'm not sure what the mechanism is there, but again, that helps with the success of the surgery, is that their appetite hormones are diminished, and so they don't have that urge to want to eat as often. But again, the importance here is to really be able to recognize the difference between physical hunger and maybe emotional, or I would say for many of us, boredom hunger. So a couple tricks would be drink a glass of water if you feel like you're getting hungry. If it's satisfied, those pains go away. It maybe was not an actual physical hunger pain. If it's just mindless eating, this is why this week's challenge was to not scroll on your phone while you're eating, or not be distracted, so that you can pay attention to those signals in the body of when you're starting to feel full, things like that. So stay cognizant about what you're doing when you're eating. Oops, I spelled that wrong. It's leptin, not leptin. Leptin's the fuel gauge. It's secreted from fat cells. Let me just fix it. It's going to bother you all. It tells the brain how much fat we have available for storage. So again, it can be an appetite signaler if the body feels like it needs more energy or something. It helps us to maintain a normal weight. This can be why it's difficult to lose the last 10 pounds, that adage, just because generally people tend to want to be skinnier than their body wants them to be. And this is because of this hormone. We operate at a little bit of an elevated fat level than most of us think we should be at. The release of leptin is impacted by how often we're eating and how much we're eating. So we'd like to keep this hormone pretty steady. So if you're someone who like goes long spurts without eating, this can screw up your leptin levels. If you're someone who like starves themselves and then overindulges at different times of the day, that can also be damaging as well. So the goal here is to not overconsume too often and don't underconsume too often. Try to keep it steady. And then also, like we've talked about, like balancing those meals and those snacks with proteins, fats, and carbs, so that we are satisfied in between our meals and aren't continuously like over-consuming. All right, the next ones are really important, and I don't think probably get a lot of attention, but really can impact our weight and our health. First one is testosterone. Most of us think of this as just the male hormone, but both males and females need testosterone. Men just happen to have higher levels than females. It's certainly helpful for sex drive, but it's really important in helping build lean body mass, supporting bone strength, so osteoporosis risk, that kind of thing, and it boosts our energy levels, which are all important things for both men and women. If we don't have enough, we also know that it slows the processes in the body that allow for fat burning. And a lot of these levels start to wane as we age. Particularly in men, this is something where it's becoming more and more common to have your testosterone checked when you're nearing the age of 60, just because the dips start to get so drastic in testosterone if you're not doing the right things, that you can start to get a lot of different issues that can be traced back to not enough testosterone. But a lot of us don't think about that as like the reason for our health issues. Things like depression, neurological issues like Alzheimer's have been linked to low testosterone levels. Increased fat tissue, again, our fat burning processes have disappeared. Osteoporosis, we talked about, brain fatigue, all those kind of things can be symptoms of low testosterone, which wouldn't be like your first thought, right? And the opposite is true if you have enough. You're able to maintain muscle mass and have a healthy heart, have energy, all that kind of stuff. Same goes with women. Some women have low testosterone levels for women too. Women also have estrogen and progesterone hormones in their body that can impact their health and their weight. Estrogen is a fat storing and a fat burning hormone. It does both. It helps with both mechanisms, and it helps the body manage the stress. Estrogen is really helpful, or I shouldn't say helpful, but really dictates like where women store their fat. So most of us get, the goal is the hourglass shape or whatever, but estrogen is kind of the dominator to help with that. If we don't have enough, it slows the fat burning processes as well, just like testosterone. Progesterone is also something you really want to pay attention to, especially as we're getting towards menopause for women, because this can impact our health, and this hormone we might not relate it to being the reason why we can't lose weight. But it blunts the side effects of stress and cortisol. And as we hit menopause, this hormone drastically decreases. And so then therefore, if we do have a lot of stress or whatever, like it's going to have like a double impact on our body. It promotes fat burning, so that would be helpful if we had enough of this hormone. And certainly, obviously, it's very high levels if we're pregnant or preparing to get pregnant and during pregnancy. If we don't have enough, it's often led to weight gain. And so I've heard a lot of women say as they get into perimenopause and menopause stages, what they did forever and ever now is just not working to keep the weight off. And a lot of times it's probably due to this hormone issue and not because of their lifestyle habits not keeping up. So it's something to think about checking if you get into those stages of life. All right, so in summary, some things you can do dietarily to help balance your hormones. These are like the top 5 foods I have found in studies that show that are helpful with different types of hormones we've talked about. 1, unflavored yogurts, or at least non-sugar added yogurts, mainly because of the probiotics in them being supportive to that digestive health and where the hormones are produced. Fatty fish, and we've talked a lot about this with those healthy omega-3 fats and not being afraid of fats. Vegetables are super helpful as well. Dark leafy greens tend to have the most vitamins and minerals and such, but any vegetable is better than no vegetable. Spices are great. If you're someone who likes to cook, putting lots of different types of spices into your meals rather than flavoring it with sugars is super helpful. And then avocados are sort of that superfood as well. Things that can sabotage our hormones: sugars, alcohol, caffeine, high glycemic foods. We talked about those in like week 2 or 3, I think, that really spike your blood sugars. And again, that goes back to that insulin cortisol cycle. And then soy products. And soy, they're found in many different things, even certain plastics and stuff. But some are natural, some are man-made. But what it does is it mimics estrogen. And so when you consume soy, then the body doesn't think it needs to make its own estrogen, but even though soy isn't actually the estrogen the body can use. So it just sort of like stops your own production, unfortunately. So key takeaways today: what can you do? 1, regular exercise. We talked about all the hormones that it helps stimulate, and it's a great way to alleviate or at least manage and cope with stress. If you're someone who's in depression or anxious, stress or exercise has, I think we've already said this, has been shown to be like so much better than any medication on the market for alleviating symptoms of depression and anxiety if someone regularly exercises. So can't stress that enough. The key here, though, is obviously don't overdo it. So if you're someone who likes to go for long runs or long exercise sessions, think of doing those at low to moderate intensities. If you're someone who's really into like high intensity, man, I gotta feel the burn type of exercise, then consider those short duration exercise episodes just to alleviate that excessive stress on the body. And always remember to have those stress moments in your exercise plans. We just talked about healthy diet. Again, proteins, fats, healthy carbs are always the way to go. Whole foods, less processed. Weight management is helpful. Most of us, this might be too late, but yo-yo dieting is certainly not helpful to the body when it comes to weight management because of all the mixed signals you're giving it throughout life. So as much as you can try to avoid drastic changes in weight throughout the years is super helpful to hormone balance. Adequate sleep, we're going to talk about this in depth next week, so I'm not going to get into it, but sleep is super important to hormone production. And then, of course, we want healthy ways to manage stress. And I'm not going to get into all the creative ways people help manage their stress because I think we all have creative ways to try to, or at least should research ways that we think are helpful. But we're not going to alleviate a lot of our stresses, but we got to figure out positive ways to survive them and deal with them. So I think that was the end. Yep. That was the last question. So I'm going to find that video quick and put it in the chat in case anyone wants to watch it. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Betty has one. She says, how does fasting impact leptin? Some say fasting is good, but doesn't it impact the leptin levels negatively? That's a good point, Betty. It does if you're doing long-term fasting. Anything less than like say a standard like 12-hour period that might include your sleeping, that's the body's able to regulate leptin while we're sleeping. If we're always continuing to run on empty though, and fasting, that's going to impact our leptin. So that's a good question. Did I answer that okay for you? We'll probably cover that more a little bit next week on sleep, but very good question. I would say the biggest, cortisol and insulin are probably the 2 most common hormones we have issues with when it comes to weight and those being out of balance. And then to follow that up, once we hit menopause, or for men, once we're hitting those higher ages, testosterone and progesterone also tend to be hormones that can impact our health and our weight that we don't necessarily think of right off the top of mind. But there are tests where you can, or labs where you can measure those levels. So, okay. I don't see any other questions, so we'll give you 5 minutes back. So keep enjoying your lunch if that's where you're headed next. Next week's challenge is focused on sleep. If I haven't said that enough, so you'll be charged with, I think, trying to get like 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. So you can start practicing now if you want, but I think there's only 4 days next week you have to sleep. I let you stay up late Friday. So you'll just have to track Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, I think. So I had a couple participants ask why I didn't have all 5 days listed there, but I wanted to give you guys a break. Okay. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Kelly.